Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy.
Yo, dear listeners, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have a return guest, Brandon DaCruz. Brandon, welcome back to the podcast.
Nikias, thank you so much for having me back on. Very excited to discuss a topic that I'm quite well versed in. So I'm looking forward to giving your audience some good insight and really be able to navigate being on the road and then also traveling while also being able to actually successfully achieve their goals, especially from a body composition and health perspective.
Yes, as soon as I thought of this topic, I knew I wanted you because you have a lot of personal experience as well as experience with a lot of clients. And I don't want to be any more mysterious, dear listeners. What we're going to be discussing in this two-part conversation is going to be how to stay on top of your physique goal when you're traveling and you also are in a fat loss phase. We're going to be discussing longer trips, shorter trips. So, for example, a weekend as opposed to an entire week away. We're going to be discussing leisure trips like sightseeing, and also business trips. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, and that's why we decided to divide this into two different episodes. And if you want to listen to Brandon, we've also had another two-part conversation on fat loss and how to prime yourself for fat loss success. And you'll find that in episodes 18 and 20. And you'll find a link to episode 18 in the show notes. So, Brandon, let's get straight into the first question. I'm wondering, what do you think are the most common and most impactful mistakes that people make when they're traveling as it pertains to both nutrition and also training and energy expenditure in general?
You got it. So I've been coaching for well over 11 years at this point, and 9 of those years I had a full-time corporate career as a director of a sports nutrition company. And that required me, it was part of my job description to travel across the country. And I honestly did that dozens of times per year. So in that time, I've not only found myself in situations where I needed to navigate the challenges of staying on track while traveling, but I've also attracted a lot of other high performers and high achievers, people that have corporate entities or they're in a high level executive position, and they have this goal set where they really want to make physique progress, but they have demanding careers which involve a lot of travel. So this has exposed me to a lot of situations, and then also just even dealing with just lifestyle clients that want to go on vacations, they want to enjoy their lives. And I always try to get this across to the population that I work with that fitness is a part of your life. It is not your life. And I also work with many fitness professionals that often neglect that aspect. So I think that this has allowed me to see many situations. And so when it comes down to the mistakes that many make when traveling, I think the number one nutrition related mistake I see many make when they travel is not making a plan ahead of time and not preparing in advance. So the individuals that struggle the most with making physique progress while traveling and the ones that they see their progress derail the most when traveling are often those who just don't plan and prepare in advance. So having a plan in advance and how well you prepare for your trips ahead of time is what will determine if you're able to continue making progress, or at the very least, if you're able to maintain your progress. It isn't always about, and we can differentiate this later in the podcast, it isn't always about making tangible progress, but sometimes progress in and of itself is not backsliding. It is that maintenance of the body composition that you have attained up until that point. So sometimes that's a victory for someone who has a very long dieting history of recidivism, where every trip they've went on, they've massively regained weight during those periods of time. So sometimes a victory and a win in and of itself is just maintenance. However, if you are that person that you are not planning in advance and you're not able to make progress or at least maintain progress when traveling, it's really going to derail your goal to lose fat and then also to maintain a lean muscular physique. And the issue is that by failing to prepare in advance, you are preparing to fail and you're increasing your likelihood of falling off track, which is why having an intelligent plan in place is the first step to succeeding in the goal of continuing to make physique progress while traveling. This lack of preparation leads me to the next most common nutrition related situation that I see many make. And I'm going to base this off of my experience and then also the literature. And that is relying too heavily on restaurant meals and eating out far too frequently while traveling. Oftentimes, when someone doesn't have a plan and strategy in place prior to traveling, what I see is that they attempt to wing it. And we've all seen this where that person goes from having a strategic plan in place for their diet, and then all of a sudden they're at the other end of the spectrum and they're just kind of winging it meal to meal and day to day. And really, what this ends up resulting in is that they start to rely on restaurant meals because they don't have a plan in place. And this is an issue for many reasons, as restaurant meals can stall our physique progress for a variety of reasons that many overlook. So, first and foremost, restaurant meals are literally engineered. If you look into the neuroscience behind it, they're engineered to make us eat more calories, which is why many eateries, whether it be a common chain, it doesn't have to be fast food, it could be a regular restaurant, but many of them offer the mass majority of their menus are filled with calorie-packed meals filled with combinations of starch, fat, sugar, and salt, which make it hard for us to put the fork down and push the plate away. So it's very hard to manage our calorie budgets as a result of what we're being served or what is even being offered. And the issue with restaurant meals is that they're designed and served in a manner where they're hyper palatable, they're pleasurable and enjoyable. And this leaves us predisposed to over consuming calories and to engage in something that's called passive overconsumption, which is when we unintentionally eat far more than we intended to or that we wanted to. And so this doesn't always mean that someone goes in there and they're looking to binge or they're looking to be, overindulgent. It's just that these foods drive us to have a propensity and a likelihood and a desire to eat far more than we even realize because they have a very low satiety value. And this can be especially detrimental during a fat loss phase because in order to effectively drop body fat, you need to consistently maintain a calorie deficit, meaning you need to ensure that over the consistent period of time, you're eating less calories than you're burning. And the fact of the matter is, meals prepared at restaurants have far more calories than the meals that you'd prepare for yourself, which can lead to consuming far more calories when traveling than you need to reach your specific physique goal of losing body fat. Another nutrition related mistake many make when it comes to eating out specifically is that they underestimate how many calories are in the meals they're consuming. And this applies even to those that are tracking. So I want to make this very clear that this isn't that it's just the person that orders whatever they want and they're just really indulging themselves and having, quote unquote cheat meals. To be honest with you, I can't tell you how many times I've had a client whose fat loss progress has slowed down or even stalled due to eating out, whether it be on the road or just in their day-to-day life. And this is something I see especially prominent while someone is traveling and going on trips, whether that's for leisure and for pleasure, or they're especially business trips. A lot of people overlook what could be in these meals. And the really, I guess, insidious aspect of this is that I have conversations with clients about this every single week. And oftentimes what they'll tell me is that they track the meals. So they almost think they were good. And I encourage them to do so because I do want a level of awareness, but that's where we as nutrition professionals have to go layer deeper because they may be tracking the meals that they were eating out, but what they didn't account for was the massive errors that many restaurant menus make in terms of the calorie content of their meals. And so they thought that they were staying within their calorie and macro budget for that day or even for that week. But due to the inaccuracies in these meals and how they're labeled and how many more calories those meals actually had, their deficit was either completely erased or even in the worst case, I've seen people put themselves in a surplus as a result of just even a few meals. And so this becomes a really trying situation because it's very frustrating for those individuals because they thought in their minds and really intentionally, and I'm not saying they purposely did this or they intended to do so, but they honestly went towards nailing their goal and staying on plan. And they thought they were in a deficit, but they were unintentionally eating far more calories than they expected or than they wanted to. And they even realized. So now they didn't see any of the physique progress during a period of time as a result of those restaurant meals, despite the fact that mentally they felt like they were in a diet, they felt like they were restricted. So now you have the psychological downstream ramifications of being in a diet or in a dieting mindset, but you don't have the physical manifestations of that calorie deficit where it would be, seeing a perpetual loss of body fat. And I find that many are unaware that many restaurant menus are off by at least 30 to 50% in terms of the calories they list on the menus. And there's even research that finds them to even be more inaccurate than that. So, for example, there's a 2010 study that I've done. I've used this study in many presentations. I've done social media content on it. And I'm going to expand upon it because I have received the most feedback regarding this specific study when it comes to restaurant meals. And it's something I've shared with my clientele. And it's due to the degree of inaccuracy, and it really shocks individuals, but it opens up their ability to be aware of these things and then be much more conscious moving forward when they're looking at restaurant menus, and being a little bit more critical thinking, or utilizing critical thinking much better as a result of this. So the study is by Urban and colleagues, and what these researchers did was they looked at the accuracy of stated calorie content of restaurant food items as they were listed on their menus. And then what they did was that was the restaurant's presentation of those calorie contents and what those meals contained. And what they did was, in an objective fashion, they ordered those meals without letting the actual restaurants know. It was many chain restaurants, your TGI Fridays, your Applebee's, the things that are very common within the States. And so they ordered their regular meals or some of their most popular entree menu items, and they took them into the lab and put them in a bottom calorimeter to see exactly how many calories these actually items contained. And so when they did so, they found that some of these individual restaurant items, so the entree portion, so say that you got a burger and fries. Now the fries would be a side item onto the entree, so the burger would be the entree itself. What they found was that those individual restaurant items contained up to 200% more of their stated calorie counts, meaning that they actually contained double the amount of calories than they were labeled as having. Then when they added the free side items that come with those meals, so that could be mashed potatoes, that could be French fries, that could be potato skins, things of that sort, they found that it increased the entree's margin of error to an average of 245% over what was listed on the menu for that meal. So say that a meal, you're out at a restaurant and you see that a meal has 1,000 calories on the menu, and you order it truly thinking it has 1,000 calories, so that's what you log in your food app. Well, what this data suggests is that it could contain anywhere between 2,000 to 2,450 calories, which is a massive difference, which could easily derail your progress, as those extra 1,000 to 1,450 calories that you didn't realize that you took in, but your body received that. It's not like, your body only receives the calories that it thinks on a label. Now, the issue with that is that's a few solid days of dieting if you're in a significant deficit. And so this could essentially erase a few days of your dieting. And imagine you do this not just once a week, but you do this a few times a week, or you're on a vacation and you utilize this every single night. This is going to compound this error, this margin of error, over and over again. And so that's why it's really important to be aware of where you're eating and what you're ordering, so that you're not stalling out your progress every time you travel by eating out too frequently. And really what this comes back to is not only do we want to be making progress in the direction of our goals, but I've worked with so many individuals, especially for the goal of fat loss, and I can't tell you how many times I've had someone come to me and tell me they didn't think diets worked, or they thought they had metabolic damage, or they thought they had weight loss resistance because they were in what they thought was a deficit. So they expressed it to me, I was in a deficit, I didn't lose weight, but they didn't realize that they were utilizing a generic calorie calculator online, which could be off between 400 and 750 calories, or they were having restaurant meals on the weekends, or they were eating out and they weren't accounting for that. So they felt like they were in a diet, they were in a deficit, and there's literally no worse feeling than feeling like you're nailing your diet during a trip and then coming back to actually realize you regressed. And often this really comes down to how people eat when they travel, and not accounting for some of the margins of error, especially from a restaurant perspective. And what I really try to get it across to clients is that a trip, whether it be for leisure and pleasure, whether it be for sightseeing, whether it be for business, it should never be just about food. Oftentimes it is about getting into a new environment. It's about connecting with your friends, family, loved ones, or in the case, and this is where my experience is most applicable, is this was to really perpetuate or to push my business forward and to push the connections within that. And yes, breaking bread is an integral part of that. But at the end of the day, what you eat doesn't affect anyone else, and it shouldn't, as long as you don't make it as such. So really think about it as being where your feet are, enjoying the moment, and not making it all about food. Before I go into the common training and energy expenditure mistakes, did you want to comment anything on just like the nutrition related side of things?
So first of all, I agree with all of the common mistakes you've mentioned. Not having a plan and not prepping in advance, relying too heavily on restaurant meals, and underestimating the calories in those meals. These are all mistakes that I have seen in my own experience coaching. I also really like that you touched on the fact that it's not somebody's fault. We're not accusing anybody of doing this on purpose. It's simply the nature of these restaurant meals, and it's important to have this awareness. And I liked that you've brought up the importance of having expectations, whereby you want to set realistic ones. That's why I'm going to ask you questions about that later on. But it's important to decide in advance so that you can set yourself those realistic expectations, whether you want to be in a deficit or whether you want to maintain the results that you've achieved so far. So these are my thoughts so far, and I am very happy for you to go into the next part, so talking about training and expenditure.
You got it. And so the most when it comes to the most common training, and then I would label that as like activity related, because those are the inputs that are really going to determine your energy expenditure and your output. Those mistakes I see, the most common one that I see when someone is traveling is having an all or no nothing mentality when it comes to their training, their cardio, and their movement practices. There are many individuals, and this is such a interesting topic for me because oftentimes I'll get in these conversations, and as soon as I actually have the conversation with that client or that individual, where someone contacts me about, hey, I'm not going to train on vacation, and they give me a list of reasons why, and none of them really make sense because they don't go back to that person's why or their values. It's really an interesting thing to have that conversation because literally just having that with a client and really shifting them from this all or nothing mindset can really have such positive downstream effects on them. And so what I've seen is there are many individuals who won't train, they won't do cardio, and they won't hit their physical activity goals like their daily step count because they're in a new environment when they're traveling and they don't have their preferred gym to train in. And I always try to get my clients to realize that something is better than nothing when it comes to training, cardio, and physical activity. So even if you have access to is a small gym, you could still make the most of it. Say you only have a hotel gym, you could still get a good workout in with limited equipment. You can make the most out of that. But one thing I do whenever I travel, and this is something I suggest everyone out there do, is I'll research and I'll scope out the gyms that are local to the area that I'm staying in prior to me going on that travel. So I can see what is available, what they actually have within the gym, because they're going to have photos and everything else. A lot of times you can get these days a virtual tour of the gym, which is really advantageous. And then I want to know what hours they're open. And I've had a lot of clients do the same. And I found, and I work with many people that are into resistance training. And I understand that's not everyone's perspective, or that's not everyone's priority. However, if most people will be able to relate to the fact that they feel better when they're moving their body in some way. That could be a yoga practice, that could be Pilates, whatever it may be that gets you in an active, fashion and really, contracting muscle under load. And so what I found with many of the clients that I work with is that we want to train while we're traveling because we love training. So it's our anchor to our days. And then also it's a really good opportunity that when you're on the road, you're traveling, whether it be for pleasure or it be for work, take advantage of that new spot and go check out new gyms and go try a new training environment and get into a new atmosphere and try some new equipment. It can be very advantageous from a novelty perspective, but also I find that it often leaves clients coming back more motivated because they've been around new individuals, they've tried new equipment, and they've also just gotten out of like the stagnancy of their day-to-day routine. Sometimes I'll have a client, and this often happens. I work with many individuals that run their own businesses. They also have their own home gyms. And I work with many busy parents that are the same. They have a home gym in their basement so that they can maximize the time that they can train in the morning before their children wake up. And oftentimes they're training alone and they're training in an atmosphere that there's no motivation, regardless of what music they put on. It's not as lively as having people in that atmosphere that are pushing themselves. And you see that. And that's something that type of energy is contagious. And so sometimes I'll utilize this vacation as a reset for them. Instead of them not going to the gym, I'm like, listen, I want you to go to a public gym. I know that you don't often do that, but this is a great opportunity to do so. Another thing I try to get clients past is being so locked into the training program we're currently running. Because what ends up happening is I have a lot of people that are type A, and it's like this all or nothing mentality that if they can't follow the plan to a T, they're not doing anything. And the thing is that you don't have to train, especially when you're on a trip and it's going to be a short period of time, whether it be a few days over a weekend or it be a full week. I don't want you, and I always express this to my clients, I don't want you to skip training because you don't have access to all the equipment that you were currently using within this mesocycle. Trips are about being able to check out a new place and being where your feet are. So if you're someone who is traveling, go check out the local gyms and let the new environment inspire and motivate you to stay on track and to keep pushing for progress. Because not only is that going to be good from a physical perspective, but often what I notice with many individuals, and just listening to this, many of you out there will probably relate to this, your diet is more on point when you're training. So if you are to take time away from actual training, regardless of where you're at or where you're traveling to, oftentimes people will fall more off track with their nutrition because they go hand in hand. And that's really what I see with my own clientele, because everything I do is in a periodized fashion, meaning the training is complementing the nutrition and vice versa. And so really what I try to do is I try to get clients to stay into a routine schedule. Even if they're in a different place, that's going to be your anchor. That's going to help with your circadian rhythm. That's going to keep your sleep quality in check. That's going to help with your digestion. There's so many downstream ramifications from both a physique, but also a health perspective and just a functionality perspective, that keeping training in during a vacation, for during a trip, or during time away from home could be very advantageous. The other thing that I really like to focus on, and this is a conversation I have with every client of mine before they go on the first trip, over time, I refine my methods with a client, and a lot of people that I work with travel quite frequently. But the first thing I always talk to them about is about their activity levels, because many tend to not pay attention to their step count or to doing cardio when traveling. But I actually take a different approach with my clients when it comes to activity levels, physical activity levels, and then also cardio. First and foremost, I have clients tracking their steps, especially during a fat loss phase, as the reductions in meat are the aspect of diet-induced metabolic adaptation that often can solve fat loss the most. So if we actually look into the literature, up to 85 to 90% of the decreases in the amount of calories we burn per day during a diet via metabolic adaptation actually come from decreases in meat. And so what we really want to do is we want to utilize step tracking as an awareness tool to keep clients active and more accountable, rather than allowing them to engage in compensatory behaviors and just fall to their default habits, which would be to slouch more, to sit more, to step less. And because that's going to ultimately derail their progress. So when I have clients traveling, I will either, and this is going to be two different instances, but say I have someone just maintaining, then I'm going to keep their step count at maintenance in terms of just maintaining that daily step count that they had prior to leaving for that vacation. But if I have someone in a fat loss phase, I'll often increase their step count by around 1,000 to 2,000 steps per day during that time away. And that's going to be to offset some of the increased calories that may come along with during this trip. So if that person is going out to eat and they're tracking things, they're utilizing like my intelligent ordering methods and things like that. I'm giving them insight and suggestions as to what to order, but we have to accommodate or account for the fact that those meals may be even just 20 to 30% off, even if you try to control every single variable. So I really try to get just a little bit more activity, increase energy flux essentially, and really get them burning and churning through more calories while they're away. Another thing that I like to do is I like to encourage them to walk places while they're traveling, as it's a great opportunity to get into nature and to check out a new place without being stuck in a car. Or the other option I always tell clients about is like, listen, if there are opportunities for you to walk to the grocery store or to the local gym or to, art museum or whatever it may be, take the opportunity and get out into nature and walk there, because that's going to save you, the expense of Ubers and taxis, because at this point, like Uber rates, like anywhere you go, it's like through the roof. And so it's an opportunity to just get more active, save some money. And this is personally what I do. So whenever I travel, I actually find that my step count is a little bit elevated from my normal baseline levels. Like a lot of times when I'm traveling, it's like 20K steps per day, because when I go somewhere, I'm interested in the checking out the areas that I'm visiting, and it causes me to be more active. Another activity that I try to encourage clients to do, and I actually just had a client tag me in a post this morning, and she was out in Utah and she went on this hiking trip on the weekend. So she had went away for business. It was a Tuesday through Friday trip, but she was going to be there for the weekend. So I just encourage her, listen, you're in a fat loss phase right now. We're getting you ready for a wedding. Why don't you try to do some active scenic vacation or some activities? So she found a hiking trail. She went with her fiance, and they had a whole weekend out of it. They went camping and everything. So they spent 2 days outside, outdoors, in the nice, fresh, warm air, and they were able to stay super active. So her step count was through the roof. But it's a really good opportunity to go on hikes, to go on tours. And that's a really good way to not only get activity in, but to enjoy yourself with your friends and family and loved ones, and really have more of a bonding activity where the phone is away. A lot of times there's no service in these hiking areas, like these state parks and stuff. It's a really good time to really get locked in and connected to those that you really care about. Get out into nature, have conversations, really engage with other people without the distractions of social media or your email or whatever it may be. And I'm saying this from a perspective as someone that is literally lives on his computer and on his phone. And so when I do vacations, I always make sure that with my partner, that we plan things on the weekend or a day that we're taking, a little bit more time away from work, where we're going into the great outdoors. We're taking our dog out, like we're doing stuff in the outdoors, and it really helps from a physical perspective, a mental perspective. And so ultimately, my main focus from like a training and activity side is that something is better than nothing. And often including more activity can actually make the trip more enjoyable and fulfilling. It can also help you to make progress while you're traveling, rather than doing the opposite, where now you're decreasing, the amount of activity you're doing, or you're not engaging in training because you have this all or nothing mentality. And then you come back and you feel like you've regressed even more. You're super sore from the novelty of reintroducing training, and you've gotten outside of your baseline habits. A lot of times when I work with someone, it's not just about like what we can do in 12 weeks. It's about what habits and behaviors can we work on and cement over time to really make this part of your lifestyle, rather than just making this like a checklist that you do for, 12 weeks to get to your fat loss goal. If I can make this a part of your lifestyle, you will be much more successful. And really what I pride myself in doing is I try to get people not only to lose fat, but to keep it off. And I want to work with that rare 5% of individuals that over time, over years, removed from their dieting phase, they're able to maintain 10+% weight loss. And in the literature, we see only between 5 to 20% of individuals that lose 10% of body weight will actually maintain that over a year plus. And so really when it comes down to it, it's really about nailing the basics, getting the big rocks in place, but then also executing on them over time.
Yes, I completely agree. And actually, as you know, I coach people to do exactly the same thing, to change their lifestyle for the long run, as opposed to being locked into a 12-week program. And then once it's over, they go back to their normal life because they will not maintain the results. And I actually want to draw a connection between what you said earlier about the importance of being aware of the nutritional value of restaurant meals and what you've just spoken about regarding activity levels. Because I think a very common mistake that I see, and you can tell me, Brandon, if you see it as well, is that some people think that since they are going on a sightseeing trip and they are achieving a really high step count, that's going to offset whatever they're eating. So they feel like they can be a little bit more flexible with nutrition. And again, they don't have this awareness regarding the nutritional value of restaurant meals. And as a result, yes, they are doing maybe 20,000 steps a day instead of 10,000, but they're not aware of the fact that the greater your energy expenditure, the more your body is going to adapt to it. So it's not like you're going to continue burning more and more calories from these 20,000 steps. You are going to burn fewer calories. Your body is going to adapt and get more efficient at performing that same activity. So you're not burning as many calories as you think you are. On top of that, you are being a little bit too relaxed around your nutrition, and you're not aware of what we've spoken about with regards to restaurant meals. So that's when what happens is that you come back and you've stalled where you didn't expect to stall, or maybe you've regained some weight that you didn't intend on regaining. What do you think of that, Brandon?
100%. So I think a conversation that I've had quite frequently that goes hand in hand with what you just alluded to is the fact that many will use like activity trackers. So I have a Fitbit on myself. I have an Oura Ring right here. A lot of times people will utilize activity trackers to track calories burned. We have to realize is that those are accelerometer data that are inaccurate. So if we look at one of the most recent meta-analysis on this, they found that activity trackers such as your Fitbit, your Garmin watches, your Apple Watch, things of that sort. Oura wasn't included in this, but this was all wrist-worn devices. They are off by approximately 28 to 93%. So they can almost double, your estimation. So say for instance, you really burn 500 calories during that hike. They may say that you burn 950 to 1,000 calories. Now, the mistake in that is that these are only giving you trends over time. So say for instance, you go for your morning cardio, you generally on your watch. This doesn't mean there's accuracy within it, but we're looking for consistent trends and deviations and patterns over time. So for instance, say that generally when you do your morning cardio, your watch tells you that you burn 300 calories. Well, if now you go on this elongated hike and you burn 500 calories, that could be an indication that you did burn more calories just from a total expenditure perspective, but that does not mean that you actually burned an additional 200 calories. That is, we cannot rely on that inaccuracy. And the reason that I allude to that, or that I bring that up, is because a lot of times people will try to eat back calories. They'll add it back into their MyFitnessPal or to their chronometer app, whatever it may be. And those are highly inaccurate. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is that they overestimate the amount of calories that they burn through expenditure. So there's a study, I believe it's by Wilbaum et al. And they found that most people, they put them in a cardio regimen and they had them actually estimate how many calories they burned, and then they were able to go into an ad libitum meal after. And most people, and this is in the broad base of the literature, they overestimate the calories that they burn through actual activity and through physical activity interventions like exercise and especially cardio by up to 300 to 400%. It's astronomical. And if you even look at like some of the calorie estimation data by Lickman and colleagues, they found that people underestimated their calorie intake by 47% and overestimated their energy expenditure through exercise by 51%. So this isn't to say anyone out there is doing this purposely, but it is just an awareness tool. So you guys get some of the numbers behind these things. We as a society and as individuals, we are very sedentary, unfortunately, and we were made to move. move. And so when I talk about staying active, it's really just going back to our evolutionary background of the fact that we were meant to move and we were meant to be active, bipedal individuals. And also, I really like the activity, the benefits that activity has, and increasing activity has from an appetite regulating perspective. So we see that higher levels of activity actually regulate your appetite and make you more sensitive to satiety signals. So often people will experience less hunger and less drive to eat if they're more active than when they're sedentary. So that's really where I try to tie in both the nutrition and the training and the activity, because I find that when clients don't move enough, that they end up overeating. And now they're from being in a small surplus, now they're in a massive surplus because their energy expenditure has decreased and their energy intake has massively increased. But I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. This is something actually, there's a concept that I speak about a lot. It's called energy flux. And really that is just the relationship between energy intake and energy expenditure. But it's coupled to energy balance, and it's a way to maintain fat loss in a more sustainable manner. But really the concept I talk about is eat more, move more. But a lot of times, sometimes people will misunderstand that. What I'm talking about is eating more high volume, low energy density, very nutrient dense foods. Yes, more calories, but really putting more fuel into the system, fueling your training, and then moving more from a daily energy expenditure perspective. But I don't want people within a fat loss space to misconstrue that to mean, hey, listen, I went on this hike or I stayed super active, so I can eat whatever I want. Because a lot of times what ends up happening is we see, and this used to be very prominent when I was first coming into coaching about a decade ago, when cardio was even more prominent than it is now. And there was a lot of people that were doing cardio on the treadmill to chase cheeseburgers after, or to chase cheesecake. Like they were swapping out things and being like, well, I burned 500 calories from this cardio session, so I can eat back 500 calories. That's not how it works. First and foremost, when you're in a dieting phase and you are in a deficit, you're going to sustain metabolic adaptations from being in a deficit. And that's going to cause a down regulation in all aspects of your total daily energy expenditure. So your maintenance calorie intake is going to decrease because every component, from your resting metabolic rate to the thermic effect of feeding to your exercise activity thermogenesis, especially your NEAT, are going to decrease. So now it takes less calories to maintain your body weight. And what a lot of people don't realize is that even on the cellular level, from a mitochondrial efficiency perspective, which is what you were alluding to, Nick, is we're burning less calories for every single movement you engage in. So for every bicep curl you engage in, for every step you take, you're a lighter body, so it takes less energy to move that lighter body mass. But also from a cellular perspective, we're getting less proton leak in terms of ATP, creation and production. And so it costs less energy for every single movement we make. So you may think that you're burning a ton more calories, but we're seeing two different aspects. We're seeing the aspect from metabolic adaptation, where for every move you make and your non-exercise activities, you are decreasing the amount of calories that you burn, in terms of you're not going into a negative state of calorie expenditure, but you're not burning as much as you would if you were in energy balance or you were in a surplus. Then we have this other area of the literature, which is the constrained energy model, which shows that over very high levels of activity, which generally are above 2.5 times your BMR, you cannot burn any more calories. So say, for instance, your basal metabolic rate is 2,000 calories per day. If you look at your activity tracker and you're a 180-pound male, you burn 2,000 calories per day for resting metabolic rate. You cannot exceed 5,000 calories per day on an extended time period. So if you're seeing 6,000 calories, 7,000 calories on your calorie tracker, and you're saying, oh, I can eat all this stuff on this cruise, or whatever it may be, and this is really a common situation in the States because a lot of people go on cruises, you are not going to get away with that, unfortunately. So don't look at activity and as training as just a means of burning calories. Yes, it has that benefit, but it is really about that stimulus and being able to accrete muscle tissue and build your body, and look at the nutrition as a way to modify your body composition and maintain or induce that fat loss. And we really want to make sure that both are on point in any aspect of this. If you only focus on one, you're not going to get the best benefits of the entire program. You're not going to maximize your results. So if you only focus on your activity while you're on vacation, or you're on a trip, or you only focus on nutrition, you're going to be slighted the amount of progress that you could make within that time period and then overall.
Thank you, Brandon. One note I want to make before we move on that occurred to me is that we've been talking a lot about the inaccuracy of fitness trackers, the inaccuracy of calories on restaurant menus. And while this is all true, I also wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong impression and throw away their Fitbit and think that tracking calories is useless. Because, dear listeners, I hope both Brandon and I have been very clear in making the distinction between doing this excessively and not doing it excessively. And what I mean by doing it excessively is eating out too often and relying too much on your Fitbits. If you're doing that to an excess, then the inaccuracy is going to backfire. But that doesn't mean that eating out once a week or once in a while in a fat loss phase is going to massively set you back. All of my clients eat out in a fat loss phase and lose fat. I lose fat and eat out in a fat loss phase. Brandon and Brandon's clients do the same. It's not about um, doing it on occasion. The inaccuracy is lost, it is noise that's lost in the average. At the end of the day, your behaviors, what matters for your results is the average of your behaviors over time. So as long as the average is where it needs to be, all these tools, calorie tracking, Fitbit, and other fitness trackers, they are all good enough. They're not perfect, but they are good enough to get results.
Absolutely, Nikki's. I'm really glad you hit on that because really what I'm speaking to about inaccuracies is when they compound over time, when they're done frequently. When I have a client that they went out to eat multiple times a day, or they relied on those restaurant meals, and instead of packing, say, 2 meals, so their breakfast and lunch, and then eating a dinner out, which we'll go through on the part two, some strategies, and that's actually one of the strategies I utilize, where I'll have clients prepare breakfast and lunch, and then they have a dinner out. So we're saving calories early on in the day to bank them for later on in the evening. That is an ample strategy because that's strategic. Now, when you wing it and you just go and you don't pay attention to the calorie content and you don't realize or don't account for the fact that they're not accurate and that you're going to have to give a margin of error at least 20 to 30% over what it said on that menu, that's where you really start to trip up because now one error becomes two, becomes three, and it's almost this domino effect. The same thing can be said about activity trackers. Don't rely on them. You can use them as a gauge of trends and patterns, and they're great. They're actually very highly accurate for step counting. So when I have a client utilize an Oura Ring, a Fitbit, an Apple Watch, it's always about the activity level itself and seeing if you're going up over time or you're maintaining. It isn't about the actual degree of accuracy with that. I utilize that for some metrics and vitals like your resting heart rate, your heart rate variability, and then also the step counting. But I always tell people disregard the calorie tracking. We're not going to utilize that. We're going to use your trends in body weight to see actually the degree of a net deficit that you're in, or in a building phase, the degree of a net surplus that you're in. So really what you guys have to realize that there's no perfect tracking technology, whether it's MyFitnessPal, it's Fitbit, it is the Oura Ring, whatever it may be. There is no perfect. You would have to go into a bomb calorimeter or into metabolic chamber, which none of us have access to or the time and availability to do so. However, we have a lot of proxies to be able to estimate what these things are. And then an experienced coach is able to take that data. They'll ask you specific questions. So I have a full check-in form, which I'm checking all these things. And that's how I make my assessments over time. I gauge that client's response to what we're doing and what they have done previously. And then we're able to make the ample and proper adjustments over time to get that person in the direction of their goals and really making sure that they make progress in an efficient and effective manner.
Excellent. Now, moving on to the next question, then we can circle back to when you would decide between maintaining your results and trying to continue making progress with a deficit. And the question is, what is the perspective and realistic expectations that you, Brandon, would give a client who's about to go traveling?
All right. So the first thing that I like to do in terms of perspective is, and I'm going to focus this first on diet before I go into anything else, because diet is where I see most people mess up. And that's really where the errors and the mistakes really compound and really derails their fat loss goals. The first perspective switch that I like to get people to do is I find that many treat their diet as an on and off switch rather than a dimmer dial that we can turn up or turn down based on the phase they're in and the goals they're pursuing. So there are so many individuals who take an all or nothing approach when it comes to their fitness and their body composition goals, especially with how they approach their nutrition while traveling. I have many individuals that you could see this in day-to-day life where there's certain, subset of individuals, and what they do is they're either crossing all their T's, dotting all their I's, and nailing their diet to a T, like down to the letter, in terms of making sure they hit their calorie and macro goals, or they just discard tracking and they eat anything and everything that they want. And especially when they're in a trip, they're going to have access to such hyperpalatable, calorie-dense foods that this can be really a limitation, a bottleneck on their ability to make progress, especially if they're, it's not that you have to track every single item that you're ingesting when you're on a vacation or you're on a trip, but you want to make sure that you're eating mindfully and that you're using the positive habits that you've developed throughout the course of your fitness journey and to keep adequate nutrition in mind from a food quality and nutrient density perspective. And what I find many people to make this, the perspective mistake that they make is they have a habit of swaying from very consistent dietary habits to just winging it. And that's something that I always caution my clients about. And really what I'm trying to do is I have many people that I work with that are very body composition focused and have ambitious physique goals. So going from 100% on plan to 0% on plan is something that can substantially slow down their rate of progress depending on the length of their trip and the frequency of their trips. Another perspective switch and shift I try to make with clients is that we're aiming for progress over time rather than for being perfect, as aiming to achieve perfection is something that isn't realistic and it's not possible, even for the most disciplined of clients. And believe me, I've worked with high level competitors that have been on the Olympia level stage. I've worked with professional athletes, even they, and this is something I want to express to you guys as someone that has coached these people in the trenches, they're not perfect. You may think you see, some of their days in the life on Instagram, you see CBUM and things like that. Those are immensely disciplined individuals, but even they have bad days. So don't try to aim for perfection. I'm much more focused on having my clients focus on nailing the big rocks when it comes to being consistent and adherent with their nutrition over time, instead of just going hard out the gates to be perfect, because that generally just sets individuals up to go in the complete opposite direction when they realize perfection is impossible. And then they get discouraged as a result of that realization. And so really when it comes down to it, what I'm trying to get from a perspective switch, or what I'm really trying to get people to realize, is that we're aiming for progress throughout the course of the time that you're traveling. We really have to be realistic about the progress that you can make, or is it even realistic to expect progress? So that's where I go back to the comment I made earlier in our conversation, where for some individuals, I have to sit down before that and I have to say, listen, you have a trip. I want to know the importance of this trip. This is the type of conversation I often frame with clients. I want to know, what is a trip? What is the intention behind the trip? Who are you going with? What is the importance of this trip? And does it signify anything to you? So really what that comes down to is their value set. So say, for instance, I'm going to give you a perfect example. I have a trip this week for a client, and I actually coach both herself and her husband. So it's a couple named Andrea and Sam, and they are very type A individuals. They're very hard charging individuals, high level executives. Sam's an architect in Chicago, and they have very busy lives. They have children, and they really wanted to transform their body. So Sam is in a body recomposition phase, and his wife is in a primer phase. So throughout the last 8 to 12 weeks, we've been really focusing on losing body fat and achieving better muscle gain in Sam specifically. So Sam was trying to really increase lean mass secretion, and by proxy, by increasing his lean mass, he's lost body fat in terms of a body fat percentage perspective. Now his wife has lost a substantial amount of body fat. Our whole goal was to peak them for their 20th wedding anniversary, which is this week. So I had them both check in on Monday. I switched their check-in schedule so I could get a before vacation check-in. They will leave tomorrow, which is Wednesday. And so I've planned out, and I had already this conversation. What is the importance? This is their 20th anniversary. It's the first time they're going to be away from their kids this whole year. So it was a very high importance. They really wanted to bond with one another. And they had certain restaurants that they wanted to go to that they haven't been in several years. So yes, they did want to have some meals out, and they did want to include alcohol, which is something that they haven't been having regularly throughout the last 8 to 12 weeks. So what I did was I transitioned them into going back to maintenance. So I put them into what I call a deficit deload. And the reason I strategize, or I frame it that way, is I don't use the term diet break. That has, unfortunately, in the literature from Wing and Jeffrey, it had a great connotation, but it's kind of been bastardized in the fitness industry over the last few years, where people think of diet break as, quote unquote diet break as just eat whatever I want. And it's a complete break from the diet. I don't like to frame things that method. So I utilize a term called the deficit deload, meaning we're getting out of the deload, or we're deloading from the deficit itself. We're bringing up your calories, increasing energy availability, increasing the freedom that comes along with that, but there's still some structure in place. So what I did with them specifically, they're going to be gone for 4 days. So a 4-day deficit deload where each of their calories were back to maintenance based on them. So Sam had a bigger calorie budget increase than did his wife, just because they have differences in body size and maintenance calorie intake. But I also gave some free meals along with that. So really when I calculated, I gave them a little bit less of a deficit deload increase so that I could accommodate the meals that they had out. And I gave them suggestions in terms of what meals would be most accommodating for their actual physique goals, but I also gave them the freedom to choose meals of their own in case they just wanted to do this for something like, listen, this is a restaurant we haven't been to. It's a 5-star Michelin restaurant. This is something we really want to experience. They had that option. And so that is a very specific use case. This was very important to them. They've been preparing for this for months, and I've known about this for months. So everything was in mind of getting them ready for this date, to look their best, to feel very confident in the moment. And it's a wedding anniversary that, it's incredible that they've been able to get to this point, because most people are divorced. They have their first divorce outside of their 30s. These both are individuals in their late 40s. They've been together since they were in their early 20s. They've been through so many highs and lows in life. and they have a beautiful family and a beautiful story. And so I'm connected to that as their coach. But there's other trips where I can give you another example. I have a client, Nikki, who is a high level tech executive. She also is a huge fitness influencer. So she has like 150,000 followers on Instagram. She's very big in fitness, but her full-time career is a tech, saleswoman. And so she's constantly traveling. And right now we're getting her ready for her wedding. So her wedding is the first week of November. And so she's been traveling. She has traveled at least every other week for the past 12 weeks that we've been dieting. However, on almost every single one of those plans, except the weekend of her bachelorette party, she's dieted through that. The weekend of her bachelorette party, I brought her back into maintenance, utilizing a deficit deload for that week. But besides that, she has dieted through all those other occasions. And that's because her goal set was, I want to look my best in my dress for my wedding. And that's been her goal. That is part of her value set. She's someone that has very good habits, and she's someone that is very accountable to the plan that I set in place. So if I tell her, listen, we have to adjust these things, or there was times that she'd be on the road and she couldn't make the deviations or the adjustments from the dietary perspective, so I'd manipulate cardio and energy expenditure. So there was always ways that we could work with one another, but it's really based on that person. And in her case, when I had these conversations with her traveling, I knew that she'd be able, based on all the data that I have with her previously, I knew she can continue making progress. So I said, Nikki, if you nail these adjustments this week, you'll continue making progress through this travel. Now with the couple that I'm working with, I told them specifically, you will see your weight go up because of the fact that we're going to restore glycogen. You're going to have different types of food. So you might have an inflammatory response. You're also going to have time away from training. So your energy expenditure is going to be a little bit lower, but that's not our concern, because this is a vacation that they're only going to go once in their life. They're only going to have their 20th wedding anniversary once. And I'm going to do the same thing with Nikki when I transition her out. I'll finish her diet about 2 weeks prior so I can start increasing her calories. But the fact of the matter is, we have to be very specific with our clients and giving them realistic expectations to know that, yes, if you follow this plan, you will continue making progress, but there's a time and place for that. So I often say that my role as a coach now isn't just to know when to push someone, it's also know when to pull them back. So there are going to be times in a client's life where they're super stressed. They have this business, a presentation, whatever it may be, and it might not be the time to diet them through this condition. It might not be the time to diet them through this trip that they have planned, but there's many other occasions where we can make the most out of it, and people can make a substantial amount of progress, probably more than they'd expect, if they stay on point.
Yes, you are speaking my language. I especially like that you use the term deficit deload. It's something I've considered as well because of the connection between diet break with the idea of breaking away from the healthy habits you've been building. I still call it diet break because that's what we find in the literature, but I always say this isn't a break from the habits, it's a break from the deficits. So I call it a deficit break, and I explain that I really like that you do something very similar. And I pretty much utilize the same approach as you with regards to giving expectations and making decisions regarding the trip. Now, I'm aware that you are going to have to shoot in less than 10 minutes. So this will be the last question I'm going to ask you for today, Brandon. And it is, you've mentioned going away with other people, or, going away on a business trip and having, for example, meals with other executives. And so the last question would be for today, how would you suggest setting up boundaries with the people that are involved in your travels, so that you can still make the decisions that you want to make and make the progress that you want to make. But also, I'm aware that a lot of people feel peer pressure around certain meals and occasions because they're traveling with family or because they're having a meal with an important executive or their boss.
Absolutely. So when it comes to setting up boundaries with those around you, including those who you're traveling with, I really think it's important to remember that we all have different goals, different values, and different priorities. And oftentimes, those with body composition goals will have to approach their travel and their life in general in a different manner to be able to move themselves forward, especially when your goal is to lose a substantial amount of body fat and to get lean. You are doing something that the vast majority of individuals have not been able to attain. So if you look statistically, there's less people with a six pack than there are millionaires in the States. Or for instance, if you look at statistically at the obesity and overweight statistics, right now, around 73% of Americans are either categorized as overweight or obese. So realize that most people are living a different lifestyle than those with fitness goals. So you have to take that into consideration and hold that into context. And if those in your family, your social circle, or your colleagues aren't into training and they're not into bettering their own health through, healthy eating habits and staying active, they won't get what you're doing, why you're doing it, and may even criticize what you're doing, which often comes from their own frustration with themselves about not being able to improve their own body and their health. So keep that in mind and don't get frustrated by that. Just try to come from a place of understanding. Put yourself in their shoes and realize they're probably frustrated with their lack of progress or their lack of ability to get themselves to really do what you're doing. So sometimes you are a reflection of the life and the person that they want to be, but they're just not ready. They're not in that stage of change yet. They're in that kind of like pre-contemplation stage. They're not in that actual ready stage. And so I think the most important boundary setting strategy to manage traveling with others is to have a conversation with those you're traveling with ahead of time. And that should include speaking about your goals, your priorities, and the habits and behaviors you need to maintain to make your physique goals a reality so that they can gain a better understanding of your goals, your lifestyle, and how and why what you do on travel may look differently as to how they conduct themselves on that same trip. So I'd encourage you to explain to them what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what exactly you're working towards from a goal perspective. Because most of the criticisms you'll receive in life, especially around fitness, and especially when it comes to improving your health and changing your physique and changing your lifestyle, it really stems from a lack of understanding and knowledge by those around you. So let them know that this is important to you, first and foremost, and also what you'll need to do to achieve your goals. As I've found that when I've done so to those around me and explain why I eat the way I do, why I prepare my meals in advance, and why I frequently train in the manner that I do, and why I make it a priority when I travel, they not only understand and get it more, but they also respect what I'm doing. And it brings us closer. Before they didn't really understand it. It was kind of like I was ostracized from my family events and from, trips I'd be on with colleagues. And it was, they didn't understand. They thought I was trying to distance myself, not realizing that I was distancing myself because I felt like they didn't understand. And it was actually, it was a mistake on both our parts. So we have to own up to it. And oftentimes if you're the odd person out, and I mean that only in the fact that you're the minority, you're the person that trains, you're the fit person in your group, be the person to take a step forward and really open up the conversation. Now, when it comes to a trip for pleasure or leisure, we usually have clients eat protein-packed, like nutrient-dense meals that feature lower energy density foods like vegetables and fruits during the day so that they have more calories to play with at dinner. So in those cases, I've had them explain to their friends and family, especially when they're on like family trips, that during the day, they're going to eat the meals that allow them to feel their best and look their best, but at dinner, they'll join in with them. However, it's important to realize that at the end of the day, a deficit still needs to be maintained. So if you expect to lose fat while you're on vacation, you're still going to have to be accountable and realize that you have to maintain a state of negative energy balance. But, and just realize that when you go out to dinner, you're going to be able to eat what you want with them in terms of you could pick the food sources that you want, but you have to realize that portion control and moderation are imperative. As losing fat requires that you eat that you keep, there's some type of dietary restraint. So you can eat whatever you want. You just can't eat how much you want of it. So it has to be in terms of really being accountable to that. Now, when it comes to business trips, this is really where my expertise comes in most frequently. And this is honestly what I work with most of my clients about, because I do have clients that travel for vacations, but we're talking once or twice a year. Whereas I work with some corporate executives that travel every week of the year or every other week. And that was really my situation. And so I think it's more important to set boundaries with business trips, as often business trips entail far more frequent travel. And I was in the situation where at one time I was traveling 30 to 40 weeks out of a year. So if I had incorporated an approach that was more lax, I would have never, if I incorporated the same type of mentality that I take on a vacation, I would have never gotten to my goals. So I'd suggest setting boundaries and having that conversation with your coworkers before going on work-related travel. So have that same conversation about your why and what you're doing. But I'd recommend setting harder, bright line boundaries where you let them know you're attending business dinners for the purpose of advancing the company or your profession, but you're not going to allow it to impact your diet and your goals. So be very, forthcoming with them. In my own corporate career, I found that setting hardline boundaries, that I would be eating meals that fit in accordance with my goals, and I would not be consuming any alcohol at any business dinners, was actually something that benefited me and also rubbed off on my coworkers. So not only did they understand, but they actually, a lot of them, because I was the first person to come forward and say, listen, I'm getting grilled chicken, I'm getting a salad, like I need to prepare it in this way. I want butter and oil off of the dish. I want, dressings and condiments on the side. Because I was that person and I didn't have fear of doing so, I didn't fear judgment because I knew that my goals were more important than someone else judging me for what I was doing to get to my goals. And so by me doing so, a lot of times I'd have a coworker say, you know what, I'll get with Brandon's again. And so they felt more comfortable. These were things that they wanted to employ into their own life, but they didn't do so because they didn't want to be the odd person out. And so these days I work with a lot of high level executives who have corporate jobs and who have to go on business dinners as part of their professional life. And I have them take a very similar thing to what I used to do, and it's worked well for them. Another suggestion I'd have for any of you out there who are traveling, but worry about what others around you are doing, especially from a nutrition perspective, is first and foremost realize that you have different goals than they do. And that will require a different standard of excellence and different level of execution than most would most would not go through. But we have to realize that the average person, first and foremost, no one I work with wants to be average. And I'm sure many of you out there, if you're listening to an hour podcast on health, fitness, and nutrition, you don't want to be average either. And realize the vast majority of individuals are suffering from overweight and obesity and metabolic dysfunction. So I encourage you to, rather than allow their judgments or your perception of what they may think to impact you from truly executing on your goals and getting yourself forward, instead, take a different mentality, lead from the front and set a high standard for yourself and stick to those high standards that you've set for yourself. And then in conjunction with that, make sure you stand by your decisions. If you tell someone, listen, I'm not going to partake in the desserts on this trip, or I'm not going to partake in the alcohol consumption at this dinner, stand by it. Don't be a pushover. And do that so that you rise to the standards of yourself rather than succumbing to lower standards set by others or the peer pressure and the influence that people around you may have because they want you to join in. And it's never about what you're eating. It's never about what you're drinking. It's about how they feel as a result of you not doing so. And you have to realize that's a them problem, not a you problem. And then also, instead of caring about what others around you are eating, because sometimes people, it's the opposite end of the spectrum. Like they are almost like concerned with what other people are eating because they feel judged because they're eating a very particular manner. Instead of taking that mentality on, I really suggest that you be proud of the healthy lifestyle that you have and the way you choose to live your life, because at the end of the day, the opinions of others are not going to pay your bills, and they're certainly not going to get you to the lean muscular physique you desire. So you have to keep that in context. If you ruin one of your trips or vacations and your physique progress because of the opinions, the influences of others, you're only going to be disappointed with yourself. And at the end of the day, you can't blame them. You are in charge of your actions, your decisions, your habits, and your behaviors. So always keep that in mind and really take that role of self-accountability. If you want to get yourself forward, you're the only one that can do it. A coach can guide you and they can mentor you and they can provide you with the tools and the skill set to do so. But at the end of the day, you are the person that has to make the decisions. Don't let those around you make the decisions for you or make you feel peer pressured to the point where you're unable to stay on point with the habits and behaviors that you need to drive yourself towards your goals.
Very eloquently put, Brandon. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that in this first part of the conversation, we focused primarily on mindset so that we can make the second part all about practical suggestions. But in my view, mindset always comes first. It sets the foundation for success. So thank you very much for focusing on that aspect. And if I were to summarize this podcast, I would say that ultimately the most common problems all stem from a lack of preparation, a lack of setting realistic expectations with yourself, but also with the people involved in the journey, and on a lack of awareness of how to account for restaurant meals as well as your physical activity. Now, Brandon, I know that you have to go, so thank you very much for part one. And dear listeners, thank you for listening today, and we will talk to you in part two.
Peace.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.